quality of life of the people living there, what would that society look like? Right. So that was the mandate, and which is brilliant. Um, so a lot of their ideas were sort of developed decades ago, right? And a lot of the challenges we now face today weren't visible back then, but they are now. And so the Venus Project work is merging with my work, and I'm pulling in stuff from all over the place. And together we are developing the next generation of Venus design. I call it Venus evolution.
Do you have
Right.
any of this to show the audience, or is that
Oh well,
sure?
I don't have anything on hand really. Like I've got or do I? Hang on. So I might see. It's actually a little premature because we haven't actually got together a media package yet,
Hmm. Okay.
and so I can talk about it because we've got agreements are in place that we can actually sort of talk together and work together. But so there is actually something I can show.
Yeah, in the Venus Project, I first came across their work with original Zeitgeist videos from like
Yeah,
20 years ago.
yeah.
And,
So yeah, and that was and lots of people have done work on it since then. So this is what I call Jacques' rest. At what point would Jacques Fresco be happy enough to sit down and take a break for a bit? And so we're operating on three fronts. We've got to develop a new industrial system, new energy, but also new manufacture, new sourcing of commodities. So we've got to completely reconstruct that. And that's not as a bigger problem as you might realize, because there's a lot of ideas out there that are very useful. We've just got to put them together in a different order. So everything I'm actually proposing to do here is actually not, it's already done. We've just got to go and do it. So it becomes a project management thing, which, I know how to do. So the second wing of the frontier that we're working on is we've got to reinvent our industrial agriculture. We've got to reestablish a new relationship with the planetary environment, and growing of our food and how we live is how we do that. So, the ideas of around regenerative agriculture and permaculture, and what the mandate there is, we should not use industrial petrochemical fertilizers anymore, and we should not use GMO technology. GMO technology, I believe, is not well enough understood, and we've got the law of unintended consequences underway right now. But petrochemical fertilizers have been linked directly to the degradation of land, arable land, and also the overloading of phosphorus and nitrogen on a global scale.
how do we
Right.
get our
So,
food then if we do away with that?
well, we go back to small scale organic. And what I'm proposing is we put everyone who's actually part of this around the table, and all solutions and all problems are on the table at the same time. We put the problems of what we're seeing at the environmental level at all levels, land degradation and all that. We also have people who understand regenerative agriculture, all the organic agricultural variants, permaculture, watershed management. But we also put around that table some of the aspects of modern horticulture. There's a lot of science that's been done that would help us. And in a collaborative fashion, we've now got to work out how we're going to grow food with industrial support, right? So imagine an organic agriculture with industrial support that actually has an organic outcome. What I'm so saying there is, like, what if we had like a factory that made organic fertilizer?
Hmm.
Instead of a compost heap, we had an industrial.
So that's one of the arguments for factory farming, et cetera, is that you have 8 billion people on the planet, and that's doing it in such a way is the only way. Doing it with making food with
So
GMOs and et cetera is the only way to feed 8 billion mouths. So
I've actually found, I found that trying to force a situation where I'm now going to find a solution for all 8 billion people, right? That's becoming very difficult. One, because we've left it so late. We don't have the time to actually do this anymore. We should have started this 40, 50 years ago. We
Mhm.
didn't. Right. The other problem is when I try and talk to most people about these issues, people get aggressive as hell. And so they just don't want to know. Right. And so, you know what? Okay. You stay where you are, and I'm going to get a small number of like-minded people, and we're going to develop something new. And so now I'm sort of saying, instead of actually getting a solution for 8 billion people, I'm going to get a solution for 10 or 20,000. And once we actually do that, we open source it.
Hmm.
Right. And so that's kind of sort of thinking there at the moment. I'm finding large sections of the society around me are choosing their fate by point blank refusing to discuss these ideas to the point where they get aggressive and try and shut down any discussion around such things.
Hmm.
Right. So it's just a whole lot simpler. You know what? See ya.
Yeah. Just
Right.
stick your head in the sand.
Right. Now,
Disregard the fact that your bum's sticking all the way
yeah.
out.
So the third wing is a new social contract. Now, when a new technology comes online, and we saw this with the steam engine, we saw this with the petroleum, we saw this with electricity, it changes how society operates. So when a new technology comes on, society will adjust. At the same time, if we're going to have a different relationship with the environment and we grow food differently, that's also going to change how we structure our society and how we interact with each other in terms of food distribution. Yeah, and how our food systems can actually coexist peacefully with the biosystems, where they help each other along, not in direct competition. Then there's also the problem is there's much about the current society which is really, really broken. A lot of the modern um, ways of doing things at a society level have really gone off the rails. And there is a distinct lack of, if every human relationship of all kinds, at all levels of institution and authority, down to the personal, is based on love, trust, respect, and honor, right? That's how I sort of see that. But in the modern society, all relationships of all kinds have been almost destroyed. Trust is an all-time low. Respect is an all-time low. And so we are at a point where we are now required to either repair the social contract or build a new one. And I suggest we need to build a new one. But you can't tell people to do that. You can't like rock up to the City of London and say, right, you will now have a new social contract. It's got to evolve over time from a small scale.
Yeah, it really sounds like this is more of a cultural issue because
Hmm.
politics is downstream of culture, right? You know, there's
Yeah.
I can't remember who said it. I think it was like Manly P. Hall or someone who said um, the amount of laws a society has is proportional to the morality of that society.
Yeah.
So the more immoral it is, the more laws it needs to keep it in line. So the more moral it is,
Right.
a perfectly moral society wouldn't need any laws. And so,
So what's been proposed here? All other groups in the past that have actually proposed new social contract have failed. Well, not all of them, but most of them. And so we're developing the idea of we're going to start the discussion. How do we do this? And we're going to set up things like a game theory lab and run simulations for 500 years to sort of see what might work and what won't work and what do we need in place before we can actually do stuff together. So anyway, we'll industrial stuff up and running first. The environmental stuff will actually sort of happen. Will take a few years to establish. You can't just sort of on a bit of ground and start growing. You've got to prepare the ground.
right,
And so yeah. Anyway, and so then once we've got those three together, then we can move into the center where we've got start talking about a genuinely sustainable human civilization post fossil fuels. Like genuinely wise. Like if we had to learn everything we need to learn, what would it be? And one of that is, for example, the nature of money should probably change. Like what do we use money for? And every single ism in the past, communism, fascism, capitalism, they've feudalism, it's all been based on conquest in some form or growth in some form. So what we are facing with now is something genuinely unprecedented. And what I would like to see is elements of all systems, like little pieces have been taken from everywhere, and we're going to develop a fundamentally new system that's not been seen before. So, but that'll happen over time. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so this is the Venus Project. This is Jacques and Roxanne. Um, and so he came up with some interesting ideas. He was working on the idea of, from an architectural point of view, of efficiency, and the spoke radial hub with various sectors around it is perhaps the most efficient. And so as the population grows, you'd have multiple settlements like this that would then be daisy chained together in a pattern that actually mirrors what the land is. Now, permaculture would dictate and decide how many and where and what shape these things actually are. And so
Now,
this is,
now, some in the audience might kind of look at this and say, this seems an awful lot similar to something like the Great Reset or some of the policies of the World Economic Forum that they're
is
pushing.
it? So
I mean,
it could.
I'm not saying that I'm
Yeah.
saying that, but
Yeah.
I'm just I can anticipate some in my people in my comment
All right.
section saying that.
Let's
So
meet that one head on. So the Great Reset comes around the idea, for example, you will own nothing. We're going to own it all. What they're basically saying is they're going to hit a currency reset. The banks are going to take everything, and we all become like a feudal society. They also, in the Great Reset, is they're talking about 15-minute cities where they're going to limit people's freedom and what they can do. And so humanity then becomes under lockdown. None of that's going to happen here. What you're looking at here is we're going to build a town. What does that town look like? And in that town, people are they've got a job to do. At the heart of this town is going to be a research institute, which is its job is to actually look at a new energy paradigm and a new industrial paradigm and a new agricultural paradigm. So anyway, so let's go out to that. Um, yeah, so here we go. So it's going to be a city for 10,000 people
mhm.
or thereabouts. At the center of it is going to be a big town square and like a cultural hub, but around that is going to be our working spaces. This with the Prometheus Institute, 2,000 researchers, engineers, technicians, and support staff, and around that is going to be our hub, our residential living hub, and around that's agriculture. And so this is my wife actually did a few artist impressions of what that might look like.
Wow, it's really nice.
And so here's another one. Um, it's also we're building a city, and that city we have stuff in the center, and you have things and rings around it. And once
Mhm.
you actually sort of got that, it's actually quite simple and elegant. And a lot of the
I mean, it's a fairly accurate representation of how cities are today to a much
yeah,
less elegant degree, right? You've got your
pretty much.
downtowns, middle, then you get further
Yeah.
out, you get the rural areas.
So here's the purpose of this city. So develop an innovation hub, assemble really strange ideas that have been rejected by society at the moment for one reason or another. Give them complete access to orthodox methods, cross-fertilize and nurture. Operate to a mandate to reinvent the industrial system. Develop a suitable system of high density energy generation. In the past, people have said, oh, it's too hard, but actually, no, that's actually now possible. Develop a system to source raw material commodities in a different way to what we're doing now. And again, that is possible if we change our thinking. The manufacturer value chain to produce finished products and raw materials in one city. And when you say, oh, that's not possible, well, the thinking there is if we simplify that city down where we can run it on a smaller number of components and have those components made from, say, 3D printing or additive manufacturing, where the feedstock for those 3D printers is sourced from commodities in a local fashion, right? And we actually have the manufacture of that feedstock in the same place that we're actually doing the manufacturing of the printing of the outcomes. We're going to look at things like, graphene technology, and we're going to grow hemp and bamboo and all these unusual sort of products. So we've got this idea that we've got a whole lot of ideas put together into one place. Here we go. At the heart of all of it, so each city will have to have a purpose, a reason to be. Energy is the master resource. So we've got to work out what to do here. And once we sort the energy out, we can actually start looking at other things. And the most pertinent thing is actually the relationship with the planetary environment. But for here, the idea was to develop a whole series of unorthodox energy ideas that I've come across that were considered politically incorrect to say out loud.
Yeah,
Now,
Nikola Tesla got his lab raided. The guy who supposedly invented a water powered car, I think he got killed too, didn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. People send me nasty memes all the time. Um, so Nikola Tesla, what was he doing? And so I did a bit of research and to understand what he was doing, and if it worked, how would society use it? And that one, for example, is should we do it? Is the other question. Now, what Tesla was doing, as I understand it, was it worked out that everything is actually what we call energy is actually very much related to frequency and vibration of matter. And so, if you've got, say, a tuning fork here and a second tuning fork, and if you were to tap one and it vibrates, the other one would sympathetically vibrate at that frequency. Right. That basic principle can be used to transmit energy. And so he had this idea of using the Schumann frequency of the Earth's atmosphere. So he had the idea where he could actually transmit industrial scale energy from New York to Wycliffe in the UK and back again with 98% efficiency. Right. And the idea was to actually generate power at Niagara Falls with hydroelectricity, which was generating so much electricity at the time. He said humanity will never need more than this. And
What
so
about like its effects on human biology and stuff? Because there's been
that's
experiments done with human
see
with
that's
Schumann
the
residents, like where they
now
put
you've
people
got
underground and then like they go crazy because they
that's the part where we said, should we do this? And the
yeah.
answer is probably not, because things like 5G, electric smog, happens to be of a frequency very similar to the frequencies that affect human health and
Mm,
mental health in particular, right? And so that I've looked at enough of that to say, well, that's actually a real thing. So should we have industrial scale electricity in the air? Like we've got Wi-Fi in the air, for example, and you're downloading sort of information off Wi-Fi, and that's actually a similar the idea of transmitting
mm.
energy is not that far out. But so what I'm advocating for here is that we understand what Tesla was working on, but we use it differently with what we now understand. And so if we can understand that Tesla was correct in his view of what energy is, then we've got to reassess what energy really is. And I'm not saying we should actually sort of have industrial power transmitted electrically, but it will change how we interact with it from an engineering point of view. And I've seen enough so far to understand that what we call magnetics, gravity, and electrostatic phenomena are all interacting in ways that we don't understand, right? Or we only half understand. You actually look behind the curtain, a lot of this sort of stuff at a fundamental level, and you go, oh, it's a bit dodgy.
Mm.
And a lot of our understandings of, say, electrostatics was set in stone in the 1830s when we didn't really know what we were doing. So the idea is to go back and look at it all again with modern eyes and modern equipment. So then there's things like zero point energy, um, where the idea at an atomic level, like matter at an atomic level, is sitting in a vast sea of energy. Now, there's a thing called the Casimir effect, which was proposed in the 50s, and in the 80s it was actually demonstrated at a very yes, two plates coming together and then being pulled apart. But the smaller those plates are, the more effective it actually is. And so machine technology in the 1980s could only go so small, and so it was demonstrated at a weak level, and it was written off as not useful. But now we've got nanotechnology and 3D printing. That kind of changes the rules of what's possible. So, has anyone looked at this? Well, not anyone in the civilian space, but they probably have looked at it in the military space. So, yeah. Anyway, so the idea is to actually get some radical thinkers together, put them all in one place, and so we've got this sort of idea here where we've got all these different ideas. We're going to look at everything from heat and material science to all these energetic signatures that can we engineer them. But there's also a massive interface between life systems and energy. The experiments where you actually sort of growing plants under a Wi-Fi router versus when the router's turned off. There's quite a difference. And systems like electroculture, which work. But if that works, then what is the relationship between electrical energy and living things? And so there's a whole lot of things to understand here. So this is the game theory lab. So the idea is here is to actually sort of put together a series of ideas and test them, and to test them many times. So to use it as a planning tool instead of, and so why is that not working? There it goes. Right. And so look at it, and over, say, a 500-year pattern. Look at the past, and but also
Where?
simulate a series of things.
Oh, okay.
And so, what will work? What do we need to have happen? Or is the answer here that we actually can't do this? It's not possible to do this. That's why it's failed so many times in the past. And if that's the answer, then that's what we must face. Um, so up to the where are we? Yeah, there's a few things here to talk. One of the things I would like to look at is reinventing transport. Right. So when I
Mm,
was in Amsterdam, I saw, like, for example, fully resourced bikeways where they had their own traffic light system, and you had these massive underground bike parks. Like they had thousands and thousands of bicycles stored properly.
right.
And so, and in the 70s, Jacques came up with a whole lot of ideas about, around monorails um, as transport. And so they work now. So we've got them. So we've got monorails.
Hmm.
Now, on mine sites, you've got a system to actually take ore from one place to another. It's a lot of infrastructure to build a railway because you've got to have it flat and everything, but you can have on stilts a conveyor system that's an underslung thing unit, and these things can shoot back and forth. And this is how they transport ore in some mine operations. And so the idea is this: we have a structure where on the top there we've got two monorails, one going in each direction, but underneath we've got shipping containers full of stuff
Mm,
moved around. And then we have a system where things can be moved around, much like Amazon warehouses track packages and move packages around. And then we have bike paths, but also more communal transport like buses and trams. And we'll have some cars, but um, yeah. So, and then there's a whole series of industrial sites. I'm looking for the agricultural. Where are we? Oh, this must be in a parallel presentation. So, oh, here we go. So
so
we're in an area
who do
that's
you present this to?
so I've got a group of people working around me at the moment, and we're kicking ideas around. We're developing a plan together, right? And so we're actually sort of having a plan. Then we'll have like a formal launch, and then we'll actually sort of open. The Venus project can actually accept more donations now. So the first stage is crowdsourcing, but we've yet to actually sort of put together a media package that describe what we are doing. But before we
Mhm.
get to that point, I wanted the team of people I've got around me to be able to not only understand the ideas I'm putting forward, but to see their ideas as well. And so we're in the process of developing things. So I've been presenting to people I'm going to be working with. Not I'm presenting it to you because it's you're
Mhm.
interested, and this is a podcast. But so we've got areas that there's no water there at all, but the soil is actually quite fertile. We're going to actually introduce water into the region, and we're going to establish a biosystem with soil and everything. And then we'll actually have a series of greenhouses that can move around in a symbiotic fashion. No-till agriculture, perennial species, and the whole bit. So the sequence is going to be first establish the regular water source, then develop healthy soil, then develop a biodiverse ecosystem, bring in plants and animals, starting very small, bacteria to insects to small marsupials, and then and only then we can talk about useful food crops. And so go through this process to establish healthy soil, look at the mineral content, remove the stuff that we don't want, and then balance those minerals out. This is what GTK does, the Geological Survey. They do this in a couple of places.
Mhm.
And then we introduce organic matter. into the soil mass, and then we nurture with regular water and fertilizers. I'll leave it for a year or more, so a full seasonal set, and now we can start sort of establishing things on top of it. Here is an example in Costa Rica where a couple who knew what they were doing got the waste product from an orange juice factory and got like 6 months worth dumped onto arid land. It was barren, and this was the outcome. They come back in a couple of years and they've got a fully fledged forest happening.
Wow.
And so this is the idea of land that's been um, degraded by industrial agriculture and no longer supports life, has to be rehabilitated.
So it
So
seems like chunks and pieces of the work you guys are doing is has already been applied in some cases in terms of like monorails and so forth, but
yeah, all
also in
done. It's
terms
all
of
done. I'm
yeah,
just assembling them in a different order.
yeah,
You have to do a lot of work before we get to something new. The innovative part is we do it.
yeah.
So once we sort of get to the idea of food production, um, that's I used to live in a place called Mount Tamborine, Australia, on an organic farm, and that's my daughter. Um,
Was that your farm?
I was renting. I was renting, so
Mm.
it's not my farm, but I was there and I was learning. Anyway, so one of the things we want to look at is hemp. Hemp doesn't need a lot of water, and hemp's an industrially very useful product. And so we're going to develop a vertically integrated value chain around hemp and around bamboo, right? And then we're also going to try things like some of the circular economy outcomes in recycling. I'll be using some of those. And we're going to do things like put that with, for example, making graphene and graphene products. And then if we start actually sort of merging these sort of things together.
Talk to us
So,
about graphene. What's so special about graphene?
so graphene is like the fourth state of, let me come out of that. Graphene is a state of matter for carbon where it is one molecule layer thick, one atom layer thick, and it's in like a hexagon pattern, like the pattern on the wall behind you. Now, what is very interesting about graphene is its material properties once you've actually produced it, um, especially when you couple it with things like nanotechnology. You can make some very advanced material science innovations with it that a genuine step forward. It's an innovation of material science which will lead to manufacture of components. It's a this is versatile as steel in what you can make. And so but at a small scale. I'm hoping, for example, that we can start making semiconductors. If we can make a lot of them out of graphene, it might be possible to print
Hmm.
a computer or a more
Interesting.
primitive computer. And so it's a fundamental step forward of how manufacturing will happen and what manufacturing is.
I
Um,
mean, how far away is that?
so, well, graphene conceptually that's happening now. There's a lot of technology developing now. Is this what is happening though? Is society or industry still doesn't quite know what to do with graphene. It's one of those things where it's still being unpacked in terms of effectiveness and acceptance by society. But also, there's some innovations that are required to actually make graphene in a more practical fashion. At the
Mhm.
moment, small boutique application. What if? But now there are groups that are starting to produce lots of it. And so, what are the implications of that? So, yeah. And so things like a couple that with things like plasma physics. If I'm backed by a thorium reactor, then I've got energy. And if I've got energy, I can say things like, I'm going to have a plasma furnace. Okay. So if I've got a plasma furnace, that really does change how I handle commodities. And if we can do an energy balance and a materials balance, then all sorts of things become possible with waste streams that weren't possible before.
Yeah, I mean, going through this entire presentation, I mean, you showed like tons of solutions. Like it's
Yeah.
not as it just the first half of the conversation it just seemed really hopeless.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
that's the thing. It's like for years of work, I was just like, what you're thinking is not going to work. And they go, yeah, come on, leave me alone. And it's so, but then when I actually sort of do my work, you do a tour of duty, and you find all these unusual things, and but then you get told to take those unusual things out of the report, and you say, "Oh, yeah, that's a bridge too far." Why is it a bridge too far? And then this we are like what I picked up on, and the reason I'm doing this is the number of organizations I would talk to who would quietly tell me that they themselves are under a lot of pressure not to say anything negative, especially something that might result in losing jobs or economic performance. And I go, you're kidding.
Yeah.
And I said, what? And so that occurred to me, that showed me that the thinking that we are using is a self-limiting exercise. We cannot proceed, not because things aren't possible, but because we tell ourselves not to talk about it. And that opened the door. And I thought, hang on a sec. Oh, if this is not being included because people find it threatening, I'm going to hurt your feelings now by talking about this stuff. All right, example of this. I had a picture of a released by the White House in America, backed by the US Department of Defense, of what is now called a UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomenon. They've come out and they've basically said what we call UFOs, at least some of them are the real thing. They're real. We just don't know what they are, and we don't know who or what is piloting them. Now, I don't care if it's a green midget with antennae that's piloting this thing or a Russian agent. Don't care. Question one, what is the engineering system that's propulsion? Question two, what's its energy source? Asking for a friend.
Yeah.
So the purpose of that thing is it's been accepted, it's real, but the implications of what we're seeing here is it's a technology that we don't understand yet. That means all options are not indeed on the table.
Yeah. That means it is possible.
It is possible. It is physically possible. So before you slash your wrist because solar panels and coal, hang on, there are other things that we can look at if we choose to. And
Yeah.
so once I understood that, then I started to quietly assemble them, and there were so many of them. There are literally hundreds of these ideas, and people in these
I
sectors.
mean, I've actually seen one like in real
Cool.
life. Yeah, like it was just like it passes through. It's like a size of a football field, and it passed through like the entire night sky without making a single sound. I don't know what it
Wow.
was. I don't know what it was,
Yeah.
but I mean, I saw one of these before in my life.
Even even if it is a military one nation state have actually developed this as a military outcome, which is entirely possible, and are just trying to not tell us. It also suggests it is possible, right? So instead of being told to stand in the corner and do as I'm told and starve to death, maybe, well, hang on, we are not helpless, right? We do have our brains, we do have our education. We've got to, though, do that. Now we're back to, oh, yeah, no, it's all hopeless. And so I went through this process where I saw all these things and I thought, shit, eh? And then I started talking to about them to various government groups. And I said, well, what about this? And they said, oh, no, 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 no. It's not politically correct for you to say that out loud. They laughed nervously. And so then it became clear of what has to happen. I'm now going to build an innovation hub outside the Western world, right? And I'm going to go to a place that no one else wants at the moment, and I'm going to build something from scratch. And as it's from scratch, I'm not in competition for anyone or anything else for the local resources, right? And then when I start to develop something useful, it will take time, but I will not hit the limitations of if I try and develop something here in Helsinki. And so that
Right.
is actually what I'm doing going forward.
So we've talked about all the problems, what we should do to solve them, but what do you think will actually happen? Not what we should do, but what do you think will actually
Okay,
play out?
okay. So I've got this model that I now talk about, and it seems to be a way of sort of like organizing thoughts. We're in a world at the moment that is shot through with deceit and deception. And humanity at large, the voting public have been lied to on so many fronts. There is an awakening in progress. The veil is lifting, right? And it's been happening for years now, but with each passing year, it seems to be getting more and more prominent. More and more people are now seeing things as they really are. I call it the awakening, when the bullshit is finally cleared away and we can all see clearly what's really been happening all this time. Once we get to that point, once we get through the awakening, to quote Jacques Fresco, this shit will have to go, right? So it says, all right, we've got to fix it. We're not. This is not acceptable. So we've got to do something about it. And so when we move from an environment of this is happening, isn't it terrible? Or they lied to us over this, or they lied to us over that. Okay, once we get through all that, okay, yeah, they lied, but now it's up to us to do something about it. We're all going to collectively look at each other and says, we now have to do something about this. Let's get to it. And then we'll go through a period of discussing ideas and turning ideas into engineering outcomes. You might call it commercialization or market innovation, whatever you want to call it. In whatever social, see, the social structures that are going to be in play going forward are also going to be very interesting because a lot of the conventional ones are no longer trusted. Politics, the law, insurance, banking, how many of them are in serious trouble now? From the context of the average person, right? And so everyone's tired and exhausted with what they have to do for day to day living, right? But once people understand, they're going to be angrier than they've ever been in their lives, right? So once we get through that, the second part is what I call the ascension. When we get past the anger, and says if we want to have a world where we actually sort of can do stuff, then we've got to build something. And we start to cooperate and we collaborate, and it's going to be like the wild, wild west, but in terms of innovation, innovation of all kinds on all fronts simultaneously. And there'll be no magic bullet. And so we're going to see the most amazing diversity of thought and diversity of outcome where everything's on a small scale, but we're collaborating. I believe society will split into what I call four groups in terms of paradigm. Whether this happens next year or over the next couple of years, remains to be seen. But the faster it happens, the better. So we can get through the ugly bit and get to the point where we can work together. But the first group I call the cornucopians. These are the people who will defend the status quo right to the bitter end. And to be frank, there's nothing you can do with such people. You can't convince them, can't talk to them, and wave goodbye, move on. The second group I call the Vikings. They're the people who will say, well, bit of chaos around, no law and order. Let's go and take stuff. Yeah, let's go and take stuff. Right. And but there'll come a point when that won't work. Because when everything's taken, now what? But that group of people will re-educate the rest of society the value of changing how they do things and how people will be having to band together in local communities for their own safety. The third group is the group I call the preppers. And these are the people who will attend to, all right, we've got a problem, nothing works. We've now got to move forward with attending to life's needs, food, water, shelter, energy, and you'll see some amazing problem solving on that front. The fourth group is a group I call the Arcadians, and they're the people who understand that there is a problem, right? But they're going to look at the long range new human civilization on the other side of this era of disruption and instability. How do we maintain all the good things in our current society? What kind of society would it be? What it would look like? And it might take 200 years to build, right? And so the Arcadians are thinking in terms of, I will now develop things that I will need to see the benefit of, but my great grandchildren might,
It's okay. I
right?
mean, it takes less time than to build a cathedral in ancient times.
Well, there you go. But people were doing that in a system that they understood. Everyone understood why this was happening and how to live in and around that. We're moving into an environment where we don't have any of those advantages, and We don't have all the skills that the cathedral builders had. But most people in who could build a cathedral also knew how to grow their own food. So, so it's going to be the steepest learning curve in recorded history thus far. And I think the generation to do it will be required to be stronger than the generation that fought World War II. And that's not us, but we will become so out of necessity. We will step up because we have no choice.
Yeah, hard times create strong men.
Yeah. So I've got this soft, well-fed exterior, so I'm not a hard man. But given the right circumstances, I could become so.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, get a few days without food, and
yeah, yeah,
shed all that pudginess off, and
all that
you're
pudgy,
ready to go.
and yeah, and away we go. So
Yeah, the line between fasting and starvation is very thin. No pun intended.
it is indeed. Don't fall down the shower, great. But yeah, and so I believe we're going to go through that level, and so in that environment, we're going to see human stupidity at all levels. I think what will happen is we will see some very disappointing behavior from organized structures like governments and large corporations that think they can game the system for their own benefit. I also think we will see some amazing behavior of individuals that will restore our faith in humanity,
Hmm.
right? And as a general rule of thumb, we're going to move away from global structures as the authority to more local structures.
Some
The
more
balance of power.
decentralization
Yeah.
to the
Everything will get.
chagrin, yeah, to the chagrin of some of these people at Davos, etc. Hello.
Yeah. So those guys are very used to being in charge of things and 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 having all the wealth. And so what if we call wealth, what we call wealth is now called something else. And it's all right, you can have all the gold bars. You do that. You keep them. We're going to now do something else. Um, like it might be bars of titanium or bars of silicon, for example, so, that requires energy to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think, for example, there's a push to globalize things and centralize things. We're going to move away from that. And we're now going to go to a more decentralized fashion. In practical terms, the local city council will have the balance of power instead of the federal government. We will still have a federal government, but what they actually do and their authority to push people around will be much, much less.
Yeah, this is what Nassim Taleb talks about, but
I think we're going to go
localism.
something,
Yeah,
and it won't necessarily be polite or easy, but that's the natural sweet spot that I think we're heading towards. And so, and human settlements like towns, they will all now cluster around a reason to be in that new environment. Like this is a lumber mill, that's a hospital, this is a smelter, this is a shipping harbor. Whatever it is, it's a reason for that population to be there and for other people to come and trade with you. And so we might see like
mm.
an adjustment of human settlements. Like these really big cities, I can see, life getting a little difficult when all these
Right.
systems that we
It
depend
already
on.
is. I
Yeah.
mean, at least here in America, I don't know how it is with. I mean, you're in Denmark, right?
Helsinki,
Finland,
Finland.
Finland, Finland. Yeah,
So Finland's still operating like a Swiss watch. There are problems here, but the problems are a much, much different caliber and a different sort of problem that you see in like Chicago or Detroit.
yeah,
Um, and it's like the American culture has lost hope and is now starting to eat itself,
yeah.
is
I
what it
mean,
looks like from the outside.
it's gotten really dark here in America. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like the mentality,
Well,
the psychology, it's not
see it
good.
as a cycle. You're going to go through the dark tea time of the soul, and things will get really, really rough. And at some point, society will collectively stand up and says, "All right, this is going to change. We ain't going to have this anymore." Right? And there's a reason we cooperate and collaborate with each other, and there's a reason we're nice to each other as opposed to being rude. And so when things get difficult, the ability to collaborate in the face of adversity is how societies survive. The ones that don't do that get ripped to shreds. right? And that's what we're all about to learn.
Yeah,
So,
it's kind of Darwinian in a way. Yeah,
sort of,
yeah.
but it really does come down to like, this is the importance, for
Res-
example, of our myths and
Responding to
legends.
the stimuli.
Yeah, who are we as a people? Like here in Finland, for example, they've had some tough times in the past, and how the Finnish culture has met them has been quite inspiring, actually. There is a strength in these people. And then you go sort of like, talk to the Russian culture, and then they've had some terrible things happen too, and they understand quite well hardship. And they what do they fall back on? Like in the Western world, like in Australia, where I grew up, it's a very materialistic society now, and so it's all about the toys you could buy, and you throw them away, and the following week you get some new toys. That's what makes you feel good. Whereas in the, let's say, the Russian culture, when things get really, really rough, they fall back on their myths and legends
Mhm.
and the stories they tell each other, the narratives. And what's interesting is in the West, we've made a point of destroying those things to the point where you're burning books and actually pulling down statues and rewriting the past. That's actually what the Russian peoples were actually would fall back on when times got really tough. But if you remove that, I don't know what
Yeah,
you're
yeah. One
gonna.
side is embracing mythos, the other side is destroying logos.
Yeah, yeah. That's and I think, for example, the Western world at some point is going to stop what it's doing, and then it's going to look at itself and says, "Who thought this was a good idea?" Well, we turn on each other. Yeah, there was a time, for example, you had the concept of the village, and everyone in the village collaborated and coordinated together, and the village itself was a very strong social unit, and it was much stronger than the individual. Whereas in the modern world, that's been shattered, and the family unit has also been destroyed as well. And so now we've got a whole lot of individuals that can't do anything and are completely dependent on the system around them to survive. It's going to be a really steep learning curve.
Yeah, it's going to be harder for more individualized societies for sure. In some places
Look,
where it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more of a family unit and a little bit more of a community sense of community. Um, Something like a monetary collapse and et cetera might be a
pain
lot more bearable.
pain is a great teacher, so it doesn't really matter what your starting point is. You'll get there eventually, one way or another. And so but people sort of say, "Oh, we're doomed. The future's so dark." I said, "Well, we faced darkness before, and we'll face it again." It's, "Oh, but it's going to be tough." Yep. And so, but again, pain doesn't necessarily have to kill us. Do you face the future with open hearts and open minds, or do you want to think in terms of fear? And if you think in terms of fear, stay where you are, and the Vikings will be along shortly. That's
Unless you're a prepper.
unless well, so preppers have a very different mindset. Preppers create. They create, then defend, but they create.
Right.
And they think in terms of culture, and they think in terms of family, and they think in terms of homestead, and they
Back
understand
to
that
basics.
the person next to them is actually their solution, not their enemy. So the preppers are a stepping stone back to a stable civilization.
Right.
So or that mentality.
I mean, the preppers, in a way, I look at it is they're kind of like the boundary line. Like you don't want to go like they uphold the boundary, the definition of a society. Whereas like if you go below it, then all of a sudden you're at Mad Max. So they kind of retain.
So Dmitry Orlov wrote a book called The Five Stages of Collapse, where he actually looks at this exact problem based on the what he personally observed when the Soviet Union collapsed. Um, I recommend you have a look at that book.
What's it called? I'm gonna look it up now.
The Five Stages of Collapse.
Oh, it's a play on words for grief.
So he actually sort of has five levels of collapse that what happens when a society goes through these things.
Okay. The Survivor's Toolkit, Dmitry Orlov.
Uh, the five stages of collapse. I don't know if is there a subtext to it?
Who's it by again?
Dmitry Orlov.
Yep, I got it.
And so the other one he wrote, which is very useful, is Shrinking the Technosphere.
Okay, saving all these.
Yep, he asked the question, does humanity control its technology, or does our technology control humanity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And how do we ensure that we get the right outcome?
that's one of the arguments against growth. I'm not
Yeah.
against growth whatsoever, but the idea of growth, but the the more growth you have, the more of this self-censoring, self-surveillance technology you're going to create for
So
a centralizing source to take hold of.
this is the paradigm of the fourth industrial revolution, where they actually want to merge your life with surveillance.
Yeah.
For example, they want surveillance inside the home.
So
They want,
you were actually more free 100 years ago, living in a
yeah,
dictatorship, like in some,
in some respects, yes.
yeah.
So I can sort of see a situation, for example, where what they're trying to do and what they're trying to convince us, this is what we need to do. It's actually creating it starts with the sequence of events is Animal Farm by George Orwell,
Mhm.
1984 by George Orwell, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And so that's the process of creating a society that's locked down. Whereas if we're really tracking resources, we don't need to go past what's actually being consumed at the local supermarket versus how many people live in the area. We don't need to surveil the individual. So the entire fourth industrial revolution, its basic premise is horseshit. It's just not it's ethically challenged, but it's also logistically and practically not possible. And it's not what we need to do anyway. So this whole push that we're sort of seeing over the last 20 years, since September 11, we had the war on terror, and they sort of initiated this surveillance police state since then, where we've forgotten about the terrorists, uh, you know, from the Middle East, and now it's actually all about the domestic civilian population are the terrorists. And so it's a surveillance thing to actually, how does a small number of people hold a large number of people in place to accept crushing food shortages and really, really savage austerity measures? So this is what it's like, a plan, a strategy that has been
Mhm.
going ahead to maintain the power of certain groups. But really, I think humanity is just going to discard them like a skin.
Yeah. And I mean, they're already losing control of everything. I mean,
Yeah.
you can just look around you. Like they've lost control of the narrative. People are not falling in line with,
Not anymore.
yeah, not anymore.
Not
And
anymore.
yeah, I mean, just look at COP28 last week. Um,
Mm.
like they caught this was it like a UAE prince or the guy who was hosting the
Yeah.
entire thing off camera, and he was getting berated by this one lady about, oh, you're not doing enough for
Yeah.
climate change. And he said, lady, with respect, we the oil, he basically said, oh, you can't live your life without oil. And he pushed
Yeah.
back against her. And then he went ahead and reiterated that stuff live on air
Yeah. So,
on the cameras.
so this is the thing. Politicians can complain all they want, but while they're complaining, they're using fossil fuels. No one's actually sort of talking about the actual practicalities of phasing out this system and creating a new one. Instead, they'll complain, and the action of complaining gives them power. Whereas the people who are actually running society in the background, if we don't help them, then society just stops.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, I believe, is peak production. Their peak, I think, was 2019. I think it was in terms of oil production,
Mhm.
which means that they're on the downward slope. And in the United States, which is the new swing producer, uh, they're in trouble too. Some of the metrics behind that too. So the idea of peak oil, whether we saw it in 2018 or whether it's still to come, remains is not important. It's around now. We've got enough markers on the ground now, and we are absolutely dependent on the stuff. What's our plan? What's our play? Anything? And so, when in doubt, run about, wave your arms, scream and shout.
That's a good one. Well, hey, Simon, I've had you on. We've been on this for a while now.
Yeah,
Really interesting stuff. I could go another 2, 3 hours if I wanted to, but want to give you some time
yeah.
into the
I've
rest of your night. But I appreciate
dinner's
you
on the
greatly for coming on.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, no trouble. There's dinner on the table, so yeah, I better go.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Do you want to plug anything? Like, where can people find you?
Um, let's see. Okay, there are a number of things that I'm sort of seeing which are solutions. Um, First of all, thorium molten salt, it was a theory before, and it's been poo-pooed, but I've now physically seen units that actually I believe will work. Right. So, who will do it first? Where it is a new technology that is coming online. Check out Copenhagen Atomics. That's copenhagenatomics.com. In that, they've actually got a sheet of what is actually delivered to the customer to look at the specifications of metrics of performance. Right. There's another technology, burning the iron fuel cycle, and there is a group called Metallo that is actually based in Netherlands, and they're looking at burning iron powder for heat. We've got an economy of heat. That is also useful. Um, Batteries are now being made out of all sorts of chemistries. Lithium is not the end all be all. There are other things we can do. You can make batteries out of sodium, for example. You can make them out of fluoride. That there are solutions. What I'm just saying. And the third thing is, if I was to plug anything, I would put forward the idea, could everyone look at the Venus Project, venusproject.com. There is a section of next steps, as what's called Venus Evolution. That is my work with theirs. I'm hoping to form an organization where we're actually going to build a city, an innovation hub. If you can, donate, and that'll get us going.
Do you have any connections with any policymakers? Anything with the Venus? Does the Venus?
The well, I'm talking to the Venus Project themselves, and so they're the
Yeah,
10
but do they
people.
have any connections to any policymakers and so forth that they
So there's no
working
formal
with?
connections. They're talking to lots of people, but there's no formal connections,
Okay.
and it's down to, I think, the difficulties of actually operating within the existing political system. It has a momentum and it has a
Mhm.
language. I'm, for example, going to Australia in May next year to talk to a group of politicians about the different energy systems that we might put together in a conference. And they're trying to put as many unorthodox ideas together to try and have a frank discussion with politicians of every stripe. Now is actually not strong enough for what's coming. And so every given policymaker will have to evolve in the face of adversity. So I don't have anyone to promote as such
What
because I
about your
haven't seen
website,
one yet.
simonmichaud.com? Is that
Okay,
the URL?
simonmoshow.com is where I'm trying to put all my work. It's not up to date. In fact, if you give me the link for this podcast, I'll put it up. It's where I actually put all my work for now. When I actually sort of get some funding behind me, I will redo that website into something a bit more sophisticated.
Okay. Well, we will place all those links in the description box below. So check those out for more content from Simon. Simon, thank you again for coming on. Really enjoyed this one. Closing in on a couple hours now, and
Yeah, this is what it
going.
takes.
Yeah, yeah,
The last couple of podcasts have been 2 and 3 hours, because
yeah.
this is what it takes.
Yep. There's a depth of research that needs to be done, and
Yeah,
2 hours is barely scratching. It's not even scratching the surface.
not
So
even close.
not even close. Well, hey guys, if you enjoyed this content, you want to see more people like Simon on the show, go ahead and like the video, comment down below. Let me know what you think. Share it. Hit the little bell notification icon. Any other YouTube thing I'm supposed to tell you to do that. And with that said, I will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
See you guys.